and welcome to Secure Insights, a podcast from Access Communications where we explore real-world insights from our subject matter experts to learn how technology is shaping a smarter and safer world. My name is Alex Walthers. I'm the team lead for our technology partners here for Access in the Americas. And I'm joined by two amazing guests who I'll introduce in just a moment. But before we get into that, I want to remind everyone that this podcast will be posted regularly to YouTube and all the major podcast sites. So make sure you're subscribed. And if you watch on YouTube, press the little bell button to be notified when new episodes drop. Now with that kind of housekeeping out of the way, I'm very excited to introduce my two guests today. So first, we have Jill Renihan, who is our Segment Development Manager for Education at Access. Welcome to the show, Jill.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here.
And also, we are very pleased to welcome Josh Gerena, who is here as our Segment Development Manager for Commercial Real Estate at Access.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So the first obvious question is, we have education and we have commercial real estate. What are the overlaps here, and why are you both here sitting at this podcast table?
When we were talking about engaging in this podcast for access control, I thought it's great, and I know about it from the K-12 perspective, but higher education and dormitories and student, housing functions a lot more like commercial real estate. So I reached out to Josh to say, hey, do you think that this would be something that you might want to join me in doing? And of course, Josh being the guy he is, he said yes. And so that's part of why Josh came to be with us.
Yeah.
So we'll have a commercial real estate and kind of higher ed background. I mean, what do the overlaps generally look like when you look at commercial real estate and higher ed?
So it's very similar, especially with dorms, because dorms outside of how we position it here at Access is part of the commercial real estate, right? So dorms utilize mobile applications, for example, for letting people come into their apartment buildings at specific times. So it's very similar in that sense, where there's a video intercom in the door, and they either give access, send access, maybe a day app or QR code to allow people to come in. And they use these type of products also for things like Uber Eats and stuff like that, delivery. So it's similar in that sense. Also, the areas they're allowed to go. It happens in commercial. There's specific parts of the buildings where a tenant could go and a tenant is not supposed to be at, right? So it's the same in that perspective. So it does kind of work together in similarities in that sense.
And dorms in higher ed, certainly function much more like apartment buildings or complexes. They're 24/7 access is required. That's really different from K-12, right? K-12 is a more secure environment most of the time. And so it's not that freedom to come and go from one building or another that exists on a higher education campus.
Maybe digging into some of the difference here on the K-12 side, what is really the biggest difference in these environments, and really how do they prioritize this protection and this safety? What are the things they're doing to implement on the day-to-day for these K-12 environments?
Well, one of the hallmark indicators of K-12 campuses is they have generally a discrete perimeter. Once it's closed, once everybody's in for the day, right? People aren't coming and going through that perimeter. They're in, and then they move freely to some degree within the context of that actual campus. And so they're open for that time of ingress at the start of the day. Kids are getting dropped off or the buses are bringing them. They're walking to school. But then once they've arrived and the school day has started, that really, the perimeter gets really closed down. So there's no coming in through a remote door that's in the back that people don't really pay that close of attention to. They're there, and then their day is all confined within that space. They're moving maybe from one class to another, but they're not freely moving in and out of the perimeter.
And so in K-12, it's really primarily focused on the concept of external threats, keeping people out, but commercial real estate, higher ed, It's a lot of different social dynamics.
Yeah,
There's
and it's
little
different everywhere,
threats
yeah.
and environments.
Yeah.
So what does that landscape look like?
Yeah, so there is some similarity. Depends what school it is, because they all have different rules. But for the most part, it's knowing where these people are going, right? That's one of the first things in commercial that you see is the different locations that people are allowed to, right? So it is monitored in that scenario. In the commercial space, everything is about smart, right? They want to be able to control everything that's happening in that building from a tenant perspective and then from the security side of things. So, one thing that you see a lot in commercial is the ability for them to have access to their apartment, that lock set, right? Maybe that main door and then their apartment, same system connected through the same mobile application. And but it is more free. It's not as secure like you go to a school. A lot of schools, like in the state where I'm from, in Jersey, you have to present an ID on the video camera. They got to process that ID. A lot of times they'll have like a system that it could trace back if you're not supposed to be there. Or
in K-12, you're right. They want to know who's coming throughout that daytime. So there's a visitor check-in process. And then where does that visitor go? So the students and staff can move freely throughout the campus, but visitors don't have that right. And so they being the school staff, need to manage that. They need to have awareness of who's going where, and that they're doing the legitimate purpose that they came for and not engaging in some other nefarious kind of behavior on campus.
Yeah. Well, so this the point of credentialing is incredibly important, obviously, with access control, and I imagine the landscapes here are very different. So in a K-12 environment, I have a 2.5-year-old who's starting to get ready for school and things like that. There's no way she's keeping a credential on her.
Yeah.
I mean, she can't even keep her socks on her.
That's right.
So what does it look like in K-12 when you need to have students, who are in the space, but then you need to restrict external visitors? What does that visitor management system process look like?
So those individuals who are coming to the campus for a temporary reason, AKA a visitor, right? They need to be vetted to determine whether or not they can actively be on a K-12 campus, right? Some individuals have to be excluded for one reason or another. It's really crucial that the school staff is screening out those individuals who can't be there, and then allowing, with a welcoming attitude, the people who can be there. And schools have to, K-12 schools have to really walk on a tightrope of welcoming students and staff and sometimes visitors onto their campus, and yet protecting them, and never forgetting that the purpose, the reason schools exist is about teaching and learning, right? We can't get so focused on security measures that now it's a place that isn't fun and doesn't necessarily feel safe, right? So they try to, in K-12, we try to really balance those two fields of safety through our security measures and then freedom to explore and learn.
So before we go to the higher ed side, in that vein, how do you subtly implement this technology so it doesn't feel like a fortress? A kid can still feel like they're going to school and not going to a lockdown environment. They want to feel happy and safe and healthy to go express themselves. So how do you balance those two concepts?
So we have to have that piece, that freedom and flexibility, and at the same time, the ability to pretty close to instantly respond to a threat if one occurs. So staying focused on the first part, where students are welcome, the environment needs to be open enough for them to move from this class to this class, or this building maybe to that building, without having to be escorted by a staff member necessarily. Of course, when they're little, when they're in kindergarten, students don't go walking off by themselves. In high school, it gets a lot closer to the higher ed model, where students have a lot more freedom and a lot more flexibility. But the doors, with the programming that can work now, that is part of good networked access control, doors need to be programmed so that there can be that freedom of movement. But then if a threat kicks off, whatever kind of threat it is, that instantly that protective factor comes back online, right?
Talking about this credential piece, when you get into then higher ed and having the freedom and flexibility, and kind of same with commercial real estate as well, what changes on the credential side? What new opportunities and new technologies can be introduced? Because hopefully it's people with a little bit more responsibility and accountability for some of those things.
Yeah, in dorms you do see things like, mobile applications on the watches of kids, and kids are really into tech, so they're getting credentials on their phone, which in reality to me is extremely more secure than losing a card, because you lose your phone, you have to have, a password to get in there, versus a card, if you don't go quickly to the security, someone could come and use it again, right? So in reality, in both scenarios, access control is the main core of how you start, right? But everything is integrated. So in commercial and even higher ed, cameras are integrated with the access control. So this person went in through, I'm viewing through the camera. In the commercial space, we do allow more facial recognition, which in higher ed and universities is a little bit of a funny conversation, right? In my side, you see it a lot, right? They're using that as an access control credential to go into a building and to move around those buildings. And then the application when it comes to analytics that is used within the commercial and even in your, like loitering, that's like a big deal within commercial. That's one of the main things that are used. And it's all being triggered back to an access control, either for messaging purposes, to ring a security guard via text or whatever. So quite similar and quite different at the same time, right? We mix and use certain products.
And the management piece of that, especially in the K-12 world, would be very, very cumbersome. And, staffs in K-12 are pretty lean. So just as an example, my former district, we had 14,000 doors. I had 2 gentlemen who were taking care of those doors.
Wow.
So that's a lot. Then when you look at trying to manage all of that credentialing, that would be challenging with students. We had 25,000 students. That would be a lot. Many of them were kindergartners, as you mentioned. Like, are we giving an access card to a 5-year-old? Doesn't seem to make the most sense. We wouldn't, they just don't travel really on their own anyway. So do they even need that level of credential? I'm not sure. I think that gets to be more than is needed. They definitely should be wearing IDs of some sort so that we know who they are. If we encounter a student who maybe is without a teacher, we have identification of who they are. Certainly on buses and things like that now, they're using those same credentials to track ridership. So it's a way to sort of keep track of who people are, but not necessarily give them access to the building.
So starting maybe on then with visitor management, in higher ed, it's there's a lot different social policies of letting people in and out of different spaces and different things like that. But what are the best practices when you have visitors or guests coming into a higher ed environment, and when and where, like, what does that technology look like? Is it giving temporary mobile access as a credential to someone and tracking that? Like, how does that work when you want to open up this space for these visitors?
I would say the experience that I run into quite a bit is usually like those dorm areas are kind of managed separately from the actual school properties, right? So they give a little bit more freedom. Now, that's not everywhere, because in some dorms you have a guard there. You have a person that's sitting there that's actually allowing people to come in or not. There's some dorms that don't allow visiting, right? But then there's the ones that do. And I've seen them to the point where they allow them to give temporary access, like a QR code or a PIN number that is, works for 4 hours or whatever, specifically during events that they might have there. But for the most part, I would say the majority of the ones that I've seen for dorms, there's some sort of security person that's giving the permission to enter these locations. Right?
So this changes the conversation because it's not just technology. You need paper process. So what maybe from the K-12 side, if a visitor's coming in to pick up a student or drop something off or whatever, there's certainly technology to address this, but then what does some of the other stuff in the back end have to look like? How do we connect security with a front desk coordinator and facilities? How do all of these things come together?
So it comes together. I think you mentioned policy. It comes together in the policies and then in the practices. And none of those are any good if the people aren't making sure that they're being adhered to, right? So it starts with first writing those policies, making sure and involving some stakeholders in that, making sure that they're going to work on the daily in the environment. So if they don't, if they are so complex and cumbersome, then people start ignoring them and they start bypassing those. So to have your good procedures, have your good policies, and then they have to be monitored and enforced and retrained more often than we think, right? We don't typically provide our staff that have these responsibilities with enough training. Like we train them, but there's turnover and then all of that. So a person approaches a school and says, I want to come in. They get vetted either outside before they ever walk into that secured vestibule, or they come in. Best practice is to vet them out there. Yeah. If they are there for no good reason, that's a better time to know that than once they're already in the building. But then they get in, they're cleared, they're okay to be there. Where do they go after that? And how do we know that they've actually exited, right? And this is important, to know, number one, you don't have somebody stowing away in a building that then they're going to do something later that's horrible. Or if, God forbid, an emergency happens, a tornado or something, how do we know to look for that person, or that they might need medical help from us? So all of those are pieces that go into the visitor management. Then they're vetted against, databases that either preclude or allow them to come in. And then, again, they need to be typically escorted to where they're meeting or going to, or they stay right there and wait for their student to be brought to them. All of those are practices that again, have to be followed, or you end up with meaningless security procedures. Yeah.
We talk all the time, I think, at Access about the technology and the stuff that technology can do, but at the end of the day, it always comes back to people and using the technology to enhance the efficiency and performance of the people. Because at the end of the day, it's that human element who's going to make these decisions. But so we talked a little bit there about visitor management, which is something that happens pretty frequently, but is maybe more of the occasional action. Let's get a little bit into the daily operations of access control. How is the daily rhythm of bell schedules and access control and opening and locking these doors? What does that cadence and hum look like in the K-12 environment?
So what it used to look like before we had electronic access control was a person, typically the plant manager or a lead custodian for a building, would go around and unlock all of those doors so that people could come to school, right? They never got locked back until after everybody was gone at the end of the day, which is a huge vulnerability. What I love about the idea of building in electronic access control and being able to program all that is that you can now have that main entrance door where most of the students arrive. That could be open for a very brief window of time and then go back to being locked. And without somebody having to remember to go do that, right? It doesn't depend on a person's memory or something else that might distract them that gets in the way, right? We had an incident where 2 deer were running through one of our campuses.
Oh, jeez.
Baby deer, right? Chased down and collected by the school resource officer. But if he was on his way to lock a gate, and he was the only one who really ever did that, and now he's chasing these deer, which, that became the priority at the moment, was to rescue them and get them to a safe location. Well, he could have not returned to that gate that he needed to lock, or assured that a particular door was closed and locked. So the electronic piece of this that does it without thinking, it doesn't take a nap, it doesn't yawn, it doesn't stretch. It just does the thing that we tell it to do at the time we tell it to do it. So that has gone a long way toward ensuring that schools are more secure than they really ever have been. Certainly we're seeing that in K-12. They've invested a lot of time, energy, effort, and certainly money in upgrading and enhancing their security measures. So on the daily, people can come and go through the door when they need to, and then the door is locked behind them and they're secure until they leave at the end of the day. And that's how it needs to really function, so that people don't find ways to circumvent security measures.
Yeah. I mean, having the electronic access control makes life so much easier for those facility guys. Once you give someone a key, then there's 50 of them, then they're lost. You don't know who has them. You don't know who has access. You don't know when and where that key is going to pop up again. So I'm sure that they're breathing a lot easier these days.
Yeah, and they don't have to like remember to go back. And then the other piece of it is, we used to have this practice in K-12 where if it was a threat, people would have to run to doors and either undog them, right, the push bar doors, or make sure that a classroom door even was locked, and a lot of them used to be lockable and unlockable from the outside only. So in some of these horrific events, people were injured or even died as a result of being too close to the intruder and not able to secure their space without being in that, in that close proximity. So that's the other piece that electronic access control can do, is that sort of single button 1 or 2 second response that locks everything and now provides a higher degree of security.
If I can add to that, the greatness about access control is the credential, right? So if a person, doesn't matter what reader you're around, if her card as a principal is programmed to have a site lockdown feature, like maybe double swipe or single swipe, she could do it from anywhere, right? Which is before you had to go to the front, or it was, when access control was more not as intelligent, you had to go to the specific readers. Now you could do it anywhere. It's really up to that credential and the rights they have, right? Even opening the doors in the morning. It could be the janitor, the first guy that swipes his card, it opens just for him. Then the principal or one of the people that work inside come and they swipe theirs, but it opens that door automatically for them, right? Yeah. And my side in the commercial is even nicer, I think, the stuff that we do with that type of tech.
I was going to say the daily operations, right? Because in K-12, there's generally a set schedule, and sure, things can change, but it's generally what to expect day in and day out. In higher ed and commercial real estate, movement's more fluid. Someone might be coming in at 2 a.m. I studied every Friday night. I was in my room, in bed at 9 o'clock. But other people might be coming in at 2 a.m. And you need to handle those. So when movement is more fluid and those activities can have more varying schedules, how does access control adapt? I mean, you had some examples there, but what does that actually look like?
I've been to, actually I've done school projects where the dorm, after 2 in the morning, you can't go in. You now have to go to the security guard. That means you're going to get in trouble for showing up. In commercial, it's different. In commercial, if you live there and you that's your house, you could come in at any time. But they use it also for trails. Something happens, someone follows them, they are able to, find this thing, grab a footage. Access control, one thing that is really good about is when you have camera integration in it. So your card swipe, that camera has a stamp there, so I can see who came, what time they came, who they came with. So if something happens, you have those type of trails. But commercial and the school side of it, that's the difference, right? I can come every day, every time, anytime, right? But then they're also looking at different things. In the commercial, you're looking at parkings. They're looking at LPRs, license recognition of the car coming in, coming out. So it's used for so much more than just your regular access. It's more for investigations and so forth.
Well, so, going down that kind of trail, I mean, how important is to have integration with your access control system with video? You've talked about LPR, you've talked about facial recognition. How important is that unification? And I'll also throw in audio, the idea that you can give people alerts and
100%.
messaging. What is the now criticalness of having this unified system as we start to see more of these technologies progress?
To be honest, a lot of times if you don't have this already functioning part of the system, you probably wouldn't be the product in that building. The world has changed where I remember 10 years ago, they wanted everything to be separate, managed separate. Now everything has to be together, has to function together. So loitering, going back, I mean, we have that, using an IP speaker. Mm-hmm. If you're there for a long time, it's triggering, a message through there. You shouldn't be there at this time or whatever, or security's coming, or can we help you, right? And that's all being done with access control, your camera, and now your IP audio. Mm-hmm. So in reality, all these systems have to speak to each other, including the video intercom, which to me, when I look at video intercom, it is part of access control. It always has, because it has the ability to unlock a door.
And I would just add to that in the K-12 world, how those things begin to work together is that let's just take that remote doorway that nobody should be going in, say during the school day. So pairing the access control with a speaker, with a camera, we can say to someone who approaches that with a line crossing, hey, you're in the wrong area. This isn't where you enter the school. Please go to the main office. That all happens automatically. So it's not that somebody sees them out there waving and runs over and opens a door. That happens, right? They've already been told that you're in the wrong location, go to the front office. At the same time, then the camera can send an SMS message to security staff to begin responding. So if a student is on their way to open that door, security can be getting there before they ever do and say, no, I got this. Thank you, but go on to class. So now we're keeping someone from intruding into the perimeter, breaching that perimeter of that school that shouldn't be there. Now that's during the day. At night, 2:00 in the morning, no one should ever be coming to that door. Yeah. So some different things can happen, right? We can power on a light so that they now know that they've been seen. Yeah. We can talk down through that speaker, either through automated messaging or directly if somebody's awake and watching the camera feed at that point to say, you're trespassing, you need to vacate this area, police will be notified. So the messaging is different depending on the daytime or time of day rather. That it becomes really important, right? That we're providing a higher level of security and response at 2 a.m. than we would be at 2 p.m.
Right. Well, so in the case of emergency response, or there's an incident or a threat that needs some sort of response, right? You mentioned tagging in police. Video provides a lot of context. What is the openness and what is a policy to consider for a K-12 to share this technology with local law enforcement? How does that collaboration come together?
So that collaboration really comes through mutual conversations, and what K-12 should have in place is a district level or definitely school level safety team that evaluates these decisions. Law enforcement should be a part of that. Your IT team should definitely be a part of that, facilities management, administration, so they can talk about how should this work? When should we share our video with law enforcement? Are we okay to share it with them all the time, or would we say an event will trigger sharing that video? It really depends on each entity's relationship and policies again around that.
We talk a lot about the connective tissue of this technology, and Access very much believes in this kind of partner ecosystem first approach where you need all of these technologies to come together, but that also means new people at the table, and bringing all these people in to have those conversations are critically important. Is this sort of environment the same in higher ed and commercial real estate?
It's happening specifically for like, let's say, public housing. We run into the scenario specifically with cameras where the outside cameras are being shared into whatever police department precinct is there. So then you have the private entity buildings that some of them are at a level of relationship with police where they're also sharing specific cameras. We did a project, Board of Education here, that every single cop in the area of the schools had access to the doors of the school, right? And the city has access to the outside cameras, main door entrance, but nothing inside without permission of the school. So we're seeing that in every segment, even in cities that are, sharing now specific, cameras from a building. Now the city has a way to view that.
So now as we're bringing more people to the table, then the conversation shifts to be maybe a little bit more about privacy and compliance, right? Because now there's all sorts of other people that have access to this information. There are things like FERPA and the Clery Act. First, can you explain what those are for any viewers who are not familiar? And maybe if we have resources, we can link them in the description below. But can we explain what those things are, and how does that change and influence access control decisions that are being made?
So FERPA is the governing legislation that deals with student records and the privacy thereof, right? My child's records wouldn't be available to you because you don't have a vested interest in.
Sure.
You might think you have a vested interest in knowing like who your kid's playing with at recess, as an example. But they get to have their identity, anything that's personally identifiable information has to be protected from public access, right? That's what FERPA revolves around. The Clery Act has to do with higher education and reporting of crime events that have happened on or around that campus. And it has a lot to do with the geography of the campus. That's how they make determinations about what needs to be shared and what doesn't. So it's real-time notifications. For example, when you think about Virginia Tech and you think about Florida State that have had school shootings, there are many, many others, but information at Virginia Tech wasn't timely shared with other people on the campus. At Florida State, information about the location of the assailant was not accurately shared with students on that campus. So some students evacuated and found themselves sort of face to face in the space with the assailant. Yeah. Those kinds of situations tell us we need to do better about educating folks about what's happening, how it's happened. And the story behind the Clery Act was a young lady who went to a school that had pretty significant criminal activity on and around the campus, and they didn't share that information out. She later, was murdered on campus, and her family made this kind of statement that they would not have chosen that university had they known. So it's all about making sure that people aren't in a position of, oh, I wish I'd known that. I would have done something differently. So that's what the Clery Act kind of focuses on.
And we talk about mobile credentials, and everyone has phones, and you want to be able to provide information very quickly, but misinformation, the spread of information, then creates a ripple effect of panic and unease and concern, which I think goes back to the concept of you have to have the paper policy in place because and you need to train on it, because it's one thing to have a plan, but then you get hit in the mouth and now what, right? And everyone panics and everyone doesn't know what to do. So the training of when this happens, here are the steps so that information can be shared quickly, accurately, and efficiently to the people that need to have access to that information.
Yeah, it's really important and not something that people just sort of get over, that they didn't have the information that they needed at the time. And if the entity isn't sharing information, other people will, as you mentioned. There will be social media posting. There will be all kinds of things that happen. And what do parents hear or see when they get that text from that loved child of theirs on a campus, and it's the middle of the day, there's something going on here, or it's whatever, an active shooter, or we've got an intruder? they're in a panic situation. So they're inundating the entity with phone calls and all of that. So you've got to have really good policy and practices around how to manage the information, the flow out as well as the flow in. And it takes, again, that village to come together to manage all of that at the time that it's going on.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about, where we were with lock and key and now adding mobile credentials and electronic access control. Let's talk a little bit more about where things are going. Will we see K-12 look to adopt more higher ed openness practices, or fundamentally are these just different environments that will be managed and operated separately?
I wouldn't see us moving into more open campuses. That's the direction we've been moving away from in K-12. Just because that level of responsibility for the safety and well-being of those children is different K-12 than it is in higher ed. In loca parentis, which means in the place of parent, the school is in that role. They have the ultimate obligation to make sure that kids are as safe at the end of the day as we can possibly keep them, and that we send them back to their parents as okay as they gave them to us, right? In higher ed, it's really different. They're, but less so than they have a higher obligation to provide for the safety of their students than, say, a shopping center does, right? Yeah. So there's a little bit of a bridge there, but it is different.
Well, maybe in the higher ed and commercial real estate space, there's more opportunity for advanced analytics because there's more opt-in. I mean, I remember an apartment building I lived in, I would have my groceries and there's no way I could open the door with a key without dropping the eggs, right? But if I could opt into a biometric and have the door open for me, absolutely.
And now they swing it. After COVID, we started seeing that in the commercial space where, if they were using facial or, access control or whatever, it was automatically opening these doors. So there's automatic doors opening. So that's the stuff that you see more in my space where it gets better and better and people want more. And, I remember when people didn't want apps. Now everything is apps, right? And so you see quite more technology being welcome into these spaces. But even business intelligence, we talk about the commercial and the user side, but then the management companies, what they want. They want to know how these buildings are being used. And it could be a dorm or it could be a school. And you mentioned lights before. And that's a big deal, when it comes to sustainability and everything else. These places want to be more responsible with everything. They want to know how many people are going at a specific time. Do I need a light on from this time, based on BI, business intelligence that they're getting out of cameras or video intercom that's being fed through an analytic like that. They want to know, right? And be able to save on electric, how to utilize these areas. I've been in commercial spaces where they put a coffee shop because they realize that in an hour, 20 to 40 women, ages 25 to 40, were hanging out every hour in that area. So they put a coffee shop. They want to make money. And this happens also in dorm that are the larger dorms. They'll put stuff like that. So they're always looking on how to implement technology where they could actually profit and save at the same time for these locations, but still maintaining security.
Especially with college students who have different schedules throughout the day. Maybe they need a pizza place on campus that's open at 2 a.m. Yeah. Again, who knows why? But also that, being able to pay with maybe their credentials, like the having one card that they have to carry that does all of those things that can provide a lot of that business intelligence of who's coming in and out where, and maybe less who, but how many people, how often, what do those numbers look like, and what can we do to make things more efficient, more safe for these different students? Because, even the coffee shop and commercial real estate, sure, they can make money on it, but that's also a great boon for the residents if that's a thing that they want and need. This is a better environment for them to be in as well.
Yeah, and in the K-12 space, it's really more about maximizing resource, right? Do I need to have staff members standing at this door, or can I let the electronics take care of that for me? At night, the size of the campus really kind of shrinks down. Some of those exterior buildings aren't being used. So can we pull resources back and not have to add more staff, but use our existing staff differently? That's how K-12 makes a really good benefit out of the analytics that go along with it.
The commercial space actually is very similar too, and that's where it comes back to that mobile application. How many guards do I really need in this building when I can have one that is managing everything from a mobile app? If I go to the restroom or wherever he goes, he has that information there, so he's still able to manage that building without having to have 5-6 people. Maybe he'll grab those other 4 people and position them in other areas where help is needed.
Right.
So you're saving there in that scenario too.
So what innovations are you most, like, what's next in these spaces? What are the things that you're most excited that maybe is starting to be a topic now, but will be an expected norm in 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think definitely either biometrics or mobile credentialing is going to make its way more into the education space for staff. As you mentioned, we talked about keys and a key gets lost, now what? Or a key gets duplicated, now what? A credential, a hard card, prox card gets duplicated. Does the system know that that's happened? It really doesn't. But if somebody tries to, if we have multi-factor authentication or mobile credentialing, somebody else tries to use that, we see the disconnect between that and that presentation. So it gives management situational awareness of that security and those security breaches that they wouldn't have versus on the old ways of doing things. Right,
it's an opportunity to be proactive rather than reactive. I know what's going on as it's happening versus someone lost a key and someone stole a bunch of stuff and you find out a week later or whatever.
Right.
What about on your side, Josh?
What? AI is the number one conversation on my side. And that's for everything. It could be for some documentation or financial stuff, but it's also for equipment, for products, right? To creating less false alarms on, alerts or whatever, or learning behaviors of people through doors, right? And we believe that's through people counting, which is very important in a conversation that's happening more. And I'm very excited for the stuff that we are little by little developing, because you want to know how much people are in that building, but you also want to know how many people left. We look at large buildings in cities like New York and Chicago. God forbid a fire happens. I know 300 people went in, and how many people, maybe went out, but we don't know. But these type of technologies are making it better and better for them to be able to analyze and realize, we had 300 people. The system reports telling me that 250 came out. So we know there's still 50 in there somewhere, right? Yeah. This is something that people didn't think of before, which is crucial because it does happen. A fire could happen. How many doors a building have in big cities? Some of these big cities that have buildings right on top of each other have a front and a back.
Yeah.
And maybe a stair coming out through a window or something like that.
And people counting used to just be a nice BI type number to have.
Yeah.
Generally, who's coming in, how many. But with accuracies increasing and more ways of correlating this data together, it can be much more used for mustering type purposes
100%.
of there's an incident, we need to know really how many people are in or not in the building.
Yeah, specifically in her realm.
Definitely K-12.
A gym, you have an event in the gym, so-and-so people were in there, where they went. Yeah. So it's again, it goes back to that integration part that it has to be already part of access control. They have to speak to each other.
Yeah.
Right.
That ecosystem story, it continues to be incredibly important. So let's maybe dive into one last question here. If you had to design the perfect access control system for K-12 and for higher ed, what's the biggest difference between the two of them? Like where would we see the biggest gap or difference in technology between what is actually offered in those two different environments?
Yeah, so K-12, it's going to, again, be that discrete perimeter that has to be buttoned down, and that only authorized people can come into one layer of that. You have to be authorized to get to the next layer in, have to be authorized to get to the next layer in. So those pieces that sort of provide those layers of protection for the students that are there, that's what's really, really important. So if it has to work well so that people don't bypass it through bad behavior, right? You can put a lot, can put a lot of money into a door, and good access control and a piece of mulch can defeat that, right? So we want to make sure that all of this works well for as seamless movement as we possibly can give to people.
Yeah, and it's the same here. Is the simplicity part is what needs to happen, and I think the tech is there is just the little hurdles that you run into with these techs where people get frustrated and now they put a piece of tape on the door to leave it unlocked, or they do things to sneak people in, right? So even tech being able to notice those things and create those alerts better is getting better, but there's still glitches there that we run into. I think we'll fix it. I think we're so close, though. I'm excited for the stuff coming out,
Me too. And the fact that alerts can tell us instantaneously that something's gone wrong with a secure entrance or exit, right? We were having a problem with kids having Uber Eats delivered to the high school, right? They'd come to a side door, somebody'd run down, get the bag from them and head back and find someplace to go eat, right? But the problem was we didn't know what was in those bags when they were getting delivered. It could have been anything.
Could have been a weapon.
Could have been a weapon. It could have been drugs. It could have been alcohol. It could have been anything. We didn't know. There were a number of other problems. Why is a student able to just leave and go to a side door when they shouldn't be, right? But that kind of awareness, there's not an entity out there that wouldn't benefit from greater situational awareness than what they actually have of their institution. The technology now can tell us that that door, which should not be open, say, from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. every single day, that door was opened. We can know that. Then we can begin to do some other things about that. But they, the system needs to be able to tell us that something is different than it should be. This is what it should be, and it's all working right. Something else has happened. This is different. Let's look into why this is different and fix it.
It seems like a lot of this comes back to the idea of the technology is here to help people make decisions, because there's so many decisions that need to be made, and the efficiencies around here is more data to allow you to be proactive in your decision making. But also, I think one of the things that was discussed a lot today was the importance of this ecosystem. Having all of these technologies come together, but also not just the technology, the people, the process, the procedures that need to come together to make the technology work. The technology can do a lot of really great things, but it can't do that last 20%. That's the people that need to come together to have those conversations.
And the design is very important, right?
The design's crucial. The training is crucial. The people adhering to those, and there's a lot that happens with tailgating and things like that, and it's really out of kindness that people hold a door open for someone. So that's training too, migrating students away from this idea of holding doors open for people, migrating adults away from that idea, because
sometimes
do it too.
we're the worst at it at times.
It's true. Adults are definitely harder to train than students are.
Excellent.
It's you look at dorms too, there's other tech that we use in dorms, like mass notification and systems, that is another tech that's in there that also has to be part of that entire ecosystem. We've done projects where that actually calls the police department, right? It will go first to a specific office. The office rings 3 times, it doesn't work, and then it goes to but it all has to be part of the same scenario. The reports got to work together and all that stuff.
Right.
Well, this was really great. Thank you guys for joining us. This wraps up today's conversation. I want to thank all of our listeners and viewers. And if this was interesting to you, make sure you subscribe to the Access Communications America's YouTube channel and press that little bell button so you can be notified when new episodes come out. If you'd like to learn more about anything that we discussed today, or get in touch with your local Access rep, or visit an Access Experience Center local to you, click the link in the description below, or feel free to visit our website at access.com. Jill, Josh, thank you again for both of you for joining us today. I really appreciated the conversation. And to our audience, remember that a smarter, safer world doesn't build itself. It takes ideas and partnerships and the courage to keep innovating. So thank you for joining our conversation today. This has been Secure Insights.